Morning, everybody. Hanukkah Sameach. It's nice to see you here. Glad we could do this today during Hanukkah. As I mentioned to all the classes, mentioned last week, mentioned this week, that no matter if I had one person in the class, even if I was just talking to myself, which I do a lot, that I would still be holding class during Hanukkah because it's exactly what the Yevanim wanted to stop us from doing. They wanted to stop three things: Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and Brit Milah, Begadol Torah. So what's kind of cool is that this Shabbat is Rosh Chodesh. I have a Brit to go to today, and Shabbat Rosh Chodesh. So I've been to a Brit on Shabbat Rosh Chodesh, which is a trifecta of the three things the Greeks wanted to stop, Syrian Greeks. But Baruch Hashem, we're together, we're learning Torah. Lilu Nishmat Avigdor Chai Avram ben Rachalea ve'Mer Tzvi, Neshama Shel Evan Aliyah. And we are on the subject of, in chapter 19, Chalkei HaChatzidut, the concept of piety. We've been talking about the section now of Yirah, of fear or awe, and how we approach Hashem in different things. And the last thing we talked about was a mitzvah. That, we say the concept is that we want to beautify the mitzvah. Zekeli va'anvehu. This is my God and I will adorn him. We learned this out from the pasuk in Az Yashir. It's a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat that talks about that, which we mentioned. And he kind of counteracts the thought process that, what is Hashem? Okay, when it comes to man between human beings, I can understand simply why you want to beautify something. You want to give someone a present, you want to make it look nice, you want to wrap it nice. This is God we're talking about. What's the point there? So he came to the conclusion, based on a pasuk in Malachi, a very famous pasuk. If you were to come before the pecha, before the governor, okay, which was the example used by the Navi Malachi, would you come like this? Would you bring this kind of thing, this scratched up item, this thing with a mum, with a blemish? Of course not. So we want to present it to Hashem in the best way possible. Now, there's another reason he doesn't directly mention it, but only indirectly, and that is how you present the mitzvah, the object, whether it's the chanukiah, the lulav, the whatever it might be, how you present it also reflects on how you relate to the mitzvah. So Chanukiah is not necessarily a good example because if you're at the OU thing, you heard me talking about that. It's a different issue. But let's just talk about a lulav, a oil. If you get by, your Yotzei the mitzvah, you get by with the puniest, almost unattractive etrog, as long as it falls into the category of being kosher, you're still Yotzei. But what does it say about yourself and your relationship to the mitzvah? So that also is what speaks to Hashem. So we're going to move on now to the next paragraph. It starts with the words V'ulam chachamim zichronam livracha. That when it comes to the service of Hashem, we can't just get by. This is talking specifically first about the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash, and then we're going to see how it applies to us. That when you're serving Hashem, don't think that you should just get by with the minimum, because what does God care if you have a nice fancy bow on it or not? They said, this whole idea of mayim that was needed to be used if it was uncovered, if it was you would not misanen, you wouldn't how do you say it, misanen, like not to purify it, like to put it through a filter and use it. So would you do that for Hashem? What is an expression? It means what you wouldn't do for yourself, you wouldn't want to do for Hashem either. If I had water and I decided was for some reason it was uncovered. Now, I'm not going to get the whole mayim gulim, the mayim water that sits overnight, but let's just say for just argument's sake, you have water for some reason that's not necessarily perfectly drinkable. So you threw it through mesanein, you put it through a brita filter, and now you can drink it. That's perfectly fine. But that kind of water could not have been used in Beit HaMikdash because it was not considered proper respect for Hashem. You should have gotten the purest stuff. In other words, instead of getting by, again, in the mashal, with tap water, you want to have the purest water to bring before Hashem. It's again the mashal of not just getting by with the basic mitzvah. Furthermore, it says the Sifrei, and all of your choice vows, what does that mean? You should only bring from the best of the best when you do want to bring something. From Matzanu, Cain v'Hevel. We also know the famous story of Cain and Hevel. Brothers did not fare very well in all the Sefer Breshit. Cain and Hevel, Yaakov and Esav, Yosef and his brothers. Things did not go well. And of course, we know the first murder is between one brother to another, fratricide, it's called in English. So what happened there in the story of Cain and Hevel, we all know. Hevel brought from the best, brought from the sheep and the fats of that sheep. Cain got by with the basic. He brought some flax, the cheapest he could bring. As the Chachamim tell us, it doesn't say that clearly in Torah. And what happened to both of them? We know, Hashem listened to, accepted the korban of Hevel, but when it came to Cain, he did not accept his. Again, this is another situation where a person has a Baal Mum, an animal that has a blemish, and he chooses to bring that instead of bringing something that's an animal that was not a Baal Mum. This is obviously not a mum or a blemish that would have prevented it from being brought as a korban. All these things, I kind of ran through this paragraph on purpose. The purpose of this whole paragraph is how we relate to Hashem through our mitzvot. If we relate to Hashem through our mitzvot, the bare minimum, use an example, let's say tefillah. Tefillah is not a good example as far as adornment, because it's an action that is not really you don't use a thing. You have a siddur, that's fine. But let's just use an example. The difference between davening with kavanah, with intention, understanding what you're saying, not rushing through it. By the way, as an aside, I have noticed over many, many years, I'm an observant Jew. Right, Martin says exactly. The more you put in, the more you get out. That's very true. I'm going to actually talk about that in a second. Thank you. Or remind me if I don't. Notice that there are people that they're davening. What they do is they hold a siddur and they use their eyes. They just read it. You don't get the mitzvah for tefillah by just reading. You have to use your words, your actual voice. Doesn't mean you have to be loud enough for everyone to hear you, but it shouldn't actually. But you have to daven and use your words. Now, you can daven and say, I have no idea what I said. You're still Yotzei. You can daven and say, I kind of understood what I said. You're Yotzei, even more so. Or I really spent some time. I did Iyun Tefillah. I learned a little bit about davening. I went into the meaning. I bought myself an English Hebrew Siddur or Spanish English or Chinese English, whatever your language is. So we know that how we relate to even davening can change in how we relate to the davening itself and how therefore reflects on us with our relationship with Hashem. So to the mitzvah. So you want to try always to make and beautify the mitzvah. If you you take 4 picnic tables and you turn them on their upright, you put a few pieces of palm branches on top, you made a kosher sukkah, 100%, no problem. Matter of fact, if you took 4 cows, not even 4, 3 cows and a little bit of something else, a post, you put 3 cows and you tied them together and they wouldn't go anywhere. You make them in the shape of a box and put schach on top of them. You made yourself a sukkah as well, believe it or not. But is that hidur mitzvah? So why do people put decorations in their sukkah? Why do people get a nicer, sometimes a silver menorah or Chanukiah rather? Why do people want to get a more mehudar etrog? Again, because you want to show your love of the mitzvah by the hidur mitzvah. That all goes back to the pasuk that Keliv and Vehu and Az Yashir. This is my God, and I will adorn him. And from the words v'hitna elefanav b'mitzvot. Why is that fall into the category of yirah? Why isn't that ahava? So we're talking about the concept of kavod right now. Kavod can fall into 2 categories of honoring, respecting. It can fall into the category of awe. It can fall under the category of love. Like, for example, how do you lechabed your parents, whether alive or not? So there's all kinds of ways you can. Those are the aseh. Those are the mitzvot aseh. Supposed to, bring them food and water and help when needed. And the isur involved with of honoring your parents. The flip side is ish imo ve'aviv tira'u. What does it mean to fear the parent? To be in awe of the parent? It means you don't sit in their seat. You don't contradict their words. If they do something wrong, you can't just say, "Oh, you're wrong." You have to, in a proper way, to respect. So the way we relate to that also can be out of, as far as the mitzvot, be out of not fear of Hashem, but again, the word yirah I've translated multiple times is awe. That you don't want to stand in this awesome place, in this place of God and serving Him, and get by with taking a bag from the Ruveni Makolit and sticking the present in there instead of wrapping it with a nice bow. Okay. I was going to say that Martin mentioned about what you get, what you put in. The more you put in, the more you get out. I'll tell you something in this book that I put out a while ago about the three images. If you've read it, you've seen this image. There's a story I tell in there, something I'd seen. I was taking a train, an Amtrak train. It was on Amtrak, whatever it was, to when I had my second job. I did it for a few months until I got tired of it. I would drive through the train, park, walk up to the platform. It was a very long platform. The platform, with no exaggeration, had to be probably almost a city block long. And I would see people come up this, and I just wait for the train. Then I see people get up, walk up to the platform, and walk to a certain spot, or walk down further to another spot. And they all got off at the same spot, and many of them got off at the same stop I did. I was wondering, why did they specifically walk all the way down to one car or a different car? Until it occurred to me that when they got off, they were opposite the stairway going down. They knew already that they got on a certain car. They knew they were going to get off. What you put in, what you plan for your future, will serve you in your future as well. The more we put into a mitzvah in this world, but we don't do it for that reason, the more we benefit in the next. We build up zchuyot, we build up credit, merits in Hashem's book, as it were. The more we relate to a mitzvah, again, the action we put in. Okay. There are many things that the Chachamim have warned us against, that we shouldn't make a mitzvah like almost cheapened in our eyes, or we just want to get rid of it. Kfaramu, this is an expression that's not meant to be taken literally. Kol ha'ochei sefer Torah arom, whoever holds the sefer Torah naked, nikbar arom, bizuy mitzvah. They'll be buried naked. Well, everyone is, because of the way they cheapen the mitzvah. It's an expression. It means similar to what you just had posted before, Mark. What you put in is what you take, is what you get on the other end, and that's true also in the negative connotation. If you relate to a mitzvah in a very negative way, if you relate to mitzvah almost in a cheapening way, it's not only not going to necessarily get you much in the way of zechut, but it's also not going to get you very much in going up on the ladder of success when it comes to mitzvot. Now, here's an interesting thing. All of us have one time or another left Yerushalayim and come back into Yerushalayim. It could be one time, it could be thousands of times. When you're coming back towards Yerushalayim from the direction of Tel Aviv, you pass this town, the city of Moza. There's Moza Elite, and there's a significant historical event that took place there. I'll mention to you in a second. The way that Bikurim were brought to Yerushalayim can be an eye-opener for us, so to speak, and how we should adorn a mitzvah. What were Bikurim? If a person were to have a tree and had any of the Shivat Haminim growing, as soon as they started to blossom and bud, you're supposed to take a red string or a string and tie around it and say, this is Bikurim, this is my first fruit. And when they do grow, you're supposed to pick them, take them to Yerushalayim, bring them to the Kohen in the Beit HaMikdash, and there's the thing you say, Arami Oved Avi, Vayed Mitzrayim, which we actually say on the night of the Seder. Now, where did that happen? What was happened? So it happened anywhere the person was. They may have been in the Galil, may have been in the south, may have been outside the city of Yerushalayim, but their whole goal was to come to Yerushalayim. And what happened was that people would actually sleep in the streets when those were going to be coming from outside Yerushalayim, were coming towards Yerushalayim, in order to greet them and then dance with them to Yerushalayim. List like last week, Parsha tying on the crimson string. Yes, interesting. Very good, Martin. You're on today. Very good. You got extra points on the final, by the way. That's right. Or maybe only on the matkonet. I don't know. We'll see. So what happened? First, let's discuss what happened, and I'll mention about Motza. Shekach Shaninu. This is what we see in the Mishnah and Bikurim. Ashoro lech lifnehem. So what happened was they would have the Bikurim, and they'd have a procession. The people would come with baskets, and they would have their an ox, and the ox would walk in front. Ukranav mitzupot zahav, and they would inlay with something gold on the horns of the animal. They put an olive wreath on its head, etc. They did all kinds of things. Furthermore, it says there, let me get through this little section and I'll explain all of this. Those who were rich would bring baskets with their bikurim, their first fruit, in baskets of gold. And the poor people would bring them in these wicker little baskets. Furthermore, shalosh midot babikurim, bikurim tosevet bikurim, itu bikurim. So it also talks about different levels of bikurim and how you treated it. What's going on here before I continue? They would come, according to the Gemara, they would come in Yerushalayim. They'd come to the city of Motza, right outside Yerushalayim. And you're starting to go towards Yerushalayim, and that final aliyah towards Yerushalayim. People would sleep in the streets. There wasn't a Kvish Achad back then. They would sleep in the streets, waiting to greet the people. They would get up for them and dance up to Yerushalayim with the Bikurim. And they would have this whole procession. And depending on your station in life, you either had a gold basket or you had one made out of reeds and you even adorn the animal. Why? Look what he says. And I'm going to come back to another point on this. All right, Lanu Behedya, here we have clearly telling us how much one person should add to the base of the mitzvah in order to honor and respect it. And here we learn from all the other, can learn towards all the other mitzvot in the Torah of what you can do to honor and respect the mitzvah. So this whole thing with Bikurim, the idea of bringing your first fruit. We have, thank God, in our Gina, we have 4 fruit trees. And I can tell you that it's always been since the day we could use them after Orla. It still is magnificent, fascinating feeling that you get when you pick your own fruit. And the Gemara tells us, a person would rather have one measure of his own fruit that he grew more than 9 measures that his friend just gave him. And it's true. You put in the tree, you watched it, you nurtured it, you put in the whatever you have to do, and then you pick that first fruit. And Hashem says, it's one of the Shivat Haminim. Very nice. Bring it to the Kohen. Bring it to Beit HaMikdash. Not only that, you have to bring it. You can't podeh. You can't redeem it and just bring money. You have to bring the actual fruit. And not only that, you have to have this whole procession. And people would wait. And they would stand up for you. Matter of fact, it specifically says you would stand up for the person. So I had an interesting discussion many years ago. You know, customs come and go, and sometimes they're good customs, and sometimes they're bad customs, and sometimes they're customs that are just based on stupidity, foolishness, or trying to copy the non-Jewish world. So a number of years ago, you don't really see it in Israel because most people stand by a chuppah. You have some chairs, but most people stand. But what you see very often in the United States in the last 20 years or so, 25 years, is that suddenly, and it's definitely a new thing, by religious weddings, that when the Chatan would walk down, the Kala would walk down, they all stand up. Very much like in a Christian wedding, where if you ever seen any movies of a wedding where the bride walks in and everyone stands up and they sing, "Here Comes the Bride." Very nice. Is it a sort of stand up? It's not a sort of stand up, but why are they standing up? They say, Chatan domel melech. As a king, a groom is like a king, so you stand for a king. So I made it a policy of my own, that I don't care how many people are standing, I sit, because there's no reason to stand. That's first of all. And one time I was sitting next to two very, very, let's just call them very great Rabbanim. And they both sat. One was on either side of me, it just happened to work out that way. And I turned to one of them, I said, look, I know why I'm sitting. I'm curious to tell me, why are you sitting? So he said that, yes, I know that people say Chatan domeh lemelech. A groom is like a king, a kala is like a queen, and they're supposed to stand. But if it's truly like a king, for a king, you don't stand up. You do what's called pishut yadayim v'raglayim. You lay down flat on the ground. He says, I'm not doing that for anybody. That's first. Then I turned to the other one. I said, why are you sitting? He said, everyone says that you're supposed to stand up for someone who's on the way to do a mitzvah. And where do they bring the proof from? They bring the proof from Bikurim, because everyone was supposed to stand up because they're on the way to do a mitzvah. It was out of respect. He said, but what was the reason they would stand? It wasn't just that they were doing it. It wasn't that they were standing just stam. It was to encourage them to do it over and over, to keep coming and doing it again. He said, when the guy walks down the aisle to go to the chuppah, you don't want to encourage him to do this again and again. So I thought that was an interesting insight. So that's just my little side comment here about the standing at a chuppah. It's not an isur, but it's one of those things that's crept in from the non-Jewish world that I don't think is the most appropriate thing. Anyways, my own shtuyo. Now the Gemara tells us in Second Shabbat, it's going to give a little bit of a list here, and I think elsewhere, a little lower down, it's going to give us more. The people who lived in the time of the Gemara were called the Amoraim. The rabbis who lived in the time of the Mishnah, the generation before, were called the Tanaim. And the Gemara tells us, he's going to quote only two things here, and later in a few minutes, a bunch of other things, that they did, these Tanaim and Amoraim would do in order to prepare for Shabbat. It says in Masechet Shabbat, Rava Rami Pazmeke Utsale. Rava would put on a special cloak, special garment specifically for Shabbat, a beautiful one, and he would daven. Now this wasn't for Shabbat. It's in Masechet Shabbat. This had nothing to do with Shabbat. We're going to come to that in a few minutes. He wears special clothes for davening. Why? Amar, he said, it's a quote from the Tanakh, from Navi, you should prepare yourself to greet your king, O Israel. Od amru avotenu zochem livracha al pasuk bigdei Esav benah hagadol hachamudot. When that pasuk, Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel stated, Ani shimashti et Abba bibgadim meluchlachim. I served my father in clothes that were dirty. Sha'iti yotzei laderech, and I would go out on the road. Haiti yotzei bibgadim nekim. I'm going on a business trip. I put on my nice clothes. Aval Esav. When Esav would deal with his father, he put on special kingly type of clothes. We know that one of the things that we learned actually from Esav was the fact he did tremendous, believe it or not, tremendous kibbud av v'em, which is why he was zochet to have his head at least in Merat HaMachpelah. At least that's what they say. Meaning that I have my priorities wrong. Esav even Esav had his priorities right. If he would stand before his own father, a human person, in special clothing, how much more so, and he would stand before God, the King of Kings. When you stand before God to daven, you should wear proper clothing, and sit before him as if you're sitting before a great king. Now, you will find in certain circles that some people will not daven unless they're wearing a hat. That's actually very admirable for those who that is their hashkafa, because they show, look, I may be sitting around my plain old kippah, so to speak, when I'm learning, when I'm going to the makolet, but I'm coming before God, I need my jacket, I need my hat. Beautiful. I think it's actually very admirable. And to each his own. But the halakha does tell us that you're not allowed to go to davening if you're wearing clothing that's inappropriate. Interestingly enough, the way that they measure that by the Chachamim is, would you stand before a human king like that? So a few months ago, there was an ambassador from, I forgot which country, that came to show his credentials, to deliver his credentials to the president here in Israel, and he was wearing something that basically was the top and a pair of nice shorts. And someone sent out a picture that said, the next time someone says to me, don't daven in shorts because you don't go before a king like that, says, here's someone's coming to wearing shorts, coming to the president of Israel to give his thing. Okay. But the truth is that when it comes to clothing, a lot of it has to do with the time and place. Well, how I'm dressed right now would be beyond reprehensible in certain centuries to go to daven. Reprehensible. A person's not allowed to daven, for example, they're full with their hands are all full of paint, they have all torn clothing, they're wearing stuff that's not appropriate. What might be appropriate in one city is not another. You might go into Mir Yeshiva and want to daven wearing sandals, and they will not let you be the chazan. But you're going to stand, in Mitzvah Nevo and you wear sandals, it's perfectly fine. A lot of it has to do with location. I know of it only one shul in Chicago I'm aware of, that even if you're an Avel and you're visiting and you're an Avel, they will not let you daven before the Amud unless you're wearing a jacket and a hat. That's their shita. That's their approach. Okay, I respect it. Why do I respect it? I don't agree with that. I don't do that, but I respect it because they're saying this is our level of what we feel people should be standing for Hashem in our shul. You do what you want, but if you want to serve as our shaliach tzibur, that's what you should do. And they're consistent. That I've noticed. I said when I've been in Chicago, I've had the opportunity a few times to daven there, and they've been very consistent. So he's saying that he's giving an example from Rava, that he wore a special cloak for tefillah. Now he's going to give us now a number of examples of what would happen when it comes to Shabbat. One of the areas where we meet Hashem most is davening. One of the other areas are mitzvot that come fairly frequently. Now, we don't blow the shofar every week. We don't make a sukkah every week, thankfully. We don't like the Chanukiah every week. We don't like blow the shofar, all these things. But we do have one big mitzvah that comes once a week, of course, Shabbat. This whole subsection of how we relate to mitzvot and how we want to honor a mitzvah and how we want to beautify a mitzvah comes the category of Shabbat and Chag. Anyone who increases their kavod, their honor of the Chag and the Shabbat, he gives nachat ruach. I already discussed what that meant a couple of weeks ago. I'm just going to use the term like nachas, but it doesn't really mean that, of course. It says creator, shekensi banu, because we were commanded, it says by the prophet Yesharim, that you're supposed to honor the Shabbat. What does that mean? What do you mean you're supposed to honor Shabbat? Once we've already verified the idea that Shabbat is involved with a fact of kibud ha-mitzvah, you're supposed to honor the mitzvah. There are all kinds of ways of doing kibud Shabbat. Now, for kavod Shabbat. Now, I may have mentioned this before. I don't remember from this class. Many of you, of course, are familiar with Rav Sabato Shlita. In his book, Tiyun Kavanot, he tells the story when he was in the Yom Kippur War, that when it was going to be Shabbat, I think it was, I mean, he's in his madim, he's in his uniform, he's filthy, what he's doing, I don't know exactly, remember the situation, but he needed to do something. He was not keeping Shabbat, of course, he's in battle, but he needed to do something that was for Kavod Shabbat. So he changed his belt, because it was still a regulation belt, but he had a different belt for Shabbat on his uniform. He needed that reminder. Obviously, Baruch Hashem, we're not in that, at least now, we should never be in such a situation, that we have all kinds of ways we can honor Shabbat. So listen what he tells us. The general rule is, anything that appears that you're giving extra honor to Shabbat, we have to do it. Therefore, our early sages, each one according to his way would honor Shabbat. Now here comes a little laundry list, again in Masachet Shabbat, of how various people would honor the Shabbat. Rabbi Abahu Havayativ Ataktika Deshina Uminasheb Nura. He would sit on a stool of ivory and he would light the fire. We'll see what that means in a second. Rav Safra Mecharech Reisha. Rav Safra would roast a head of an animal. Make a special meal. Rav Malach Shibuta. Rava himself would salt the fish. Rav Huna Madli Shraga. Rav Huna would light the fire. Again, I'm going to come back to these ideas about fire in a minute. Rav Papa Gadol Petilta. Rav Papa would twist wick, to make it a better wick for the lighting of the candles. Rav Chisda parim silka. Rav Chisda would do stuff with beets. Rav Yosef metzalchut tzive. They would chop wood themselves for their fire. Rav Nachman chatev v'ayel mechatev v'napik. He would carry things in and out. He was schlepping stuff. You're not talking about you and me. We're talking about Gedolei Yisrael from the time of the Gemara, who had the high level Ruach HaKodesh and all kinds of stuff, and they were involved in preparing even the smallest things for Shabbat, because that was a form of honoring Shabbat even before Shabbat started. Amar ilu mekalin Rabbi Amy Rav Asi milo mechatfina mekamayu. If my Rav, if Rav Ami, Rav Asi would be coming, would I not be doing these things? Would I not do all these labors? What's going on here? First of all, what's this business about lighting fires and the wicks and all that stuff? Again, it's kind of nice timing that we're talking about it during Hanukkah, but it doesn't have to do with Hanukkah. It has to do with Shabbat. You may or may not be familiar with the idea that it's just stam physics, that if you light a wick and blow it out, when you light it the second time, it lights better and quicker. I actually haven't done it for many, 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 many years, but I did years ago. It was my custom, based on this Gemara, when I put the candles in for my wife, because it's one of the things I like to do. I put the candles in before Shabbat into the pamutim, the candelabra. Say it anymore. The leichter. That I would light all the candles and blow them out. This way, when she would light them, they'd light right away and pure right away. This is what this is about here. These little, what looks to be like these minor little, like, that's how you honor Shabbat? Yeah, it's exactly how you do it. Because it's in the details also. It's not just we have a mitzvah, you're supposed to take a shower or bathe, you're supposed to change it to Shabbat clothes, you're supposed to how you walk on Shabbat, how you talk on Shabbat, all these things. But it's even in the small little things that we can honor Shabbat. Something as simple, in quotes, as pre-lighting the candle and blowing it out. Something as simple as being involved in the preparations of Shabbat somehow. Those who do no preparation whatsoever and just come into Shabbat, don't change their clothes, they still have the same weekday clothes on. They could keep Shabbat beginning to end with every single hidur and every single way they want to do the mitzvah of Shabbat, but there's still something lacking in the kavod Shabbat. V'tireh, let's continue in the text. Let's look at the comparison of what Rav Nachman tells us when he said that, look, I would schlep for my Rebbe. Why wouldn't I schlep for Hashem? We have what to learn from him. He thought about it. Rav Nachman thought to himself, what would I want to do to honor someone who I do want to honor? What would I do? No, you're going to have a guest in your house. That's Shabbat. They're going to come for a meal. You have friends coming from Chutz La'aretz. They come to your house for Shabbat, for a meal on a Tuesday night. It's time they're coming for a meal. Would your house look exactly like it does every day? If it's in pristine condition, that's great. But if it's not, you'd make sure to clean up a little bit, dust, maybe vacuum and clear the table, whatever it is that you have in the way to honor your guest. So Rav Nachman said, if I'm going to do that for Basar V'Dam, if I'm going to do that for a human being, Kal V'chomer, I'm going to do that for Hashem. What does it mean for Hashem? Hashem's for everything. We know that Shabbat is the Shabbat HaMalkah, that Hashem comes a special way. He gives us in the Shema Yitera. We also welcome on the night of Shabbat. So just the things he would do for a human guest, he would do also for Shabbat. Now, there is a similar idea we actually see. You just took the words right out of my mouth, but Mark just posted just now. Exactly that. We see a similar idea in the story of Mesilat Esther. Haman is being told by the king. He says, what do you think should be done for someone who's been good to me? Haman thinks to himself, because he's thinking this is going to be about me. Oh, I would do this and this and this, and you should put him on the king's horse, and you should put him in special clothing. And then Haman kind of says, oops, when, of course, Achashverosh tells him, okay, go do that to Mordechai Yehudi. But how you want to be either honored by yourself, how you wish to be honored, how would you feel if you get invited to someone's house for a meal and the place is a pigsty and it's a mess and it stinks and the food is just and you're being served like, just like here, just like take the serving pot and put it on the table here, just help yourselves. It's the same food, right? We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. We're talking about the example of taking a steak and serving it on china or serving it on a paper plate. It tastes different, but it doesn't. It technically doesn't. It's in here. It's a mind thing. Person, now this word arum here does not mean naked. It means clever. We see that word 2 times, arum, 2 times within 2 psukim in a row in Sefer Breshit. End of Perek Bet, in the beginning of Perek Gimel. The end of Perek Bet, it said that Adam and Chava did not know that they were eromim. They didn't know they were naked. Hashem made for them kotnot or vayal vishem. He made for them coverings to clothe them. And very next Perek begins, the Perek Gimel begins, the right words. That the snake, exactly. The snake was clever, the most clever. It turned out to be not so clever, I guess. A person should be clever in their way they act in Yirat Hashem. It's not just you can automatically say, okay, here's how I'm going to Yirat Hashem, but you have to put some thought into it to understand one thing from another, learn and teach yourself something. And also to even invent kind of new ideas for yourself and for others if it works. Not just Shabbat, but in general, how can you bring more nachas to your Father, Hashem? In all the possible ways you could show that. Because you recognize the grandiosity, the magisterial being of Hashem, being of God. Anything that we relate to regarding to Hashem, we will be giving we infuse with tremendous amount of respect and kavod, or honor. But Hashem, in His great humility, also wanting to give us kavod and to give us from His kedusha, His holiness. We have to appreciate what we have. For those of you who are learning Tanya, you know we have what's called the Nefesh Elokit. We have this special neshama that Hashem gave to the Jewish people. Hashem gave us the concept of kedusha, whether it's overt, Sefer Torah, mezuzah, tefillin, mitzvah, clay mitzvah, tashmishei kedusha, or it's potential, something that could be kadosh. It is right now it's called klipa. It's covered, but it's not yet kadosh. It becomes kadosh by what we do with it. That He gave us those abilities, and Am Yisrael ourselves, we are an Am Kadosh, and we have to reflect that back to Hashem. That is the idea of the Yirat HaRomemut, or the awe of magisterial God, as He's mentioned before, which is the form of respect or kavod that also comes closer, as I said to you before. Sometimes they're like share the same space to a level of love. As I will write, God willing. There's Yirat HaRomemut when I do it out of fear, out of awe of Romemut, of the grandiosity of God, that brings me to a level of love, as opposed to the other form of Yirah, which is the Yirat HaOnesh. I do things because I don't want to get punished. I don't want to get in trouble. That's not the main way to serve Hashem. And these other things don't continue from a point of Yirat HaOnesh. What does that mean? When I do things out of Yirat HaRomemut, because I'm in awe of God, the more I do, the more it infuses me with the love of Hashem and want to do more. But when I do something, mitzvot, or don't do an isur because I'm concerned I might get punished for not doing it, or I might be punished if I do it, it doesn't bring you to a level of love. It's a very different kind of approach to Hashem. Again, because I'm teaching both Mesilat, Yesharim, and Tanya, I'll mention that we will be dealing extensively with the difference between Yirat HaOnesh and Yirat HaRomemut. What does it mean, Yirat Hashem? We will. Quite a bit down the road, but Bezrat Hashem, we will. Next week, he's going to continue talking to us a little bit more about Shabbat, a little bit more about Kavod, and then we're going to also talk to a little bit more detail of a little bit more on Yirah, and then we're going to move over to the topic of Ahavat Hashem. That's the coming attractions. Bezrat Hashem. Next week, We'll meet again 9 a.m., God willing, next Wednesday morning. All goes well. And in the meantime, have a wonderful day and Hanukkah Sameach.